Okay, get ready, because this deep dive we're tackling a chapter, it feels like we're stepping right into a Philip K. Dick novel.
Oh, yeah. You know, that kind of mix of like sci-fi and philosophy, but then like throws in a little bit of the absurd.
Exactly. We're talking moonmen and interdimensional Playboy articles and a character named Luger Foucault, who's basically like a cosmic janitor for weird ideas.
It's wild, but I think it's going to make you think in ways you really weren't expecting.
So before we launch ourselves headfirst into hyperspace, can we like set the scene a little bit? The chapter kicks off by introducing this concept of the hypercube, which is kind of like a space with all these moons and these creatures called moon men.
And the crazy thing is there's this weird goo in this hypercube that can give you, get this, moon powers. They don't like scientifically explain it or anything, but it kind of sets up this whole power struggle thing.
Okay, so we have this character, King Excel Sama, who is obsessed with these moon powers.
Sounds about right.
He kidnaps a moon man, makes it eat this goo, and then forces the poor thing to like transfer the powers to him.
Yeah. It's pretty brutal, not gonna lie. But it shows you just how much this king wants power, maybe even how far he'll go for knowledge, you know?
Totally. But then things get really weird. Instead of keeping the moon powers for himself, he gives them to his daughter,
Princess Powerpeen.
Princess Power Chan, right?
And she's this awesome young ruler, already thinking about these big, universe-changing concepts.
She's definitely a different kind of ruler than her dad.
Oh, yeah, way more thoughtful, and you could even say more ethical about how she uses power.
And with these new moon powers, she creates this thing called the hypersphere. Like, picture a cube, right? And you smooth out all the edges and corners until it's a perfect sphere.
It's kind of like that, but way more complex, multi-dimensional, you know? It's like she's taking the hypercube and totally reshaping it with this brand new understanding of the universe.
Okay, that makes sense. But as with all new ideas, things get a little messy. The hypersphere needs like sort of rules, like sub-concepts to really make it work.
And that's where things go totally off the rails.
And that's where Luger Foucault comes in. He's this fixer, someone who smoothed out all these crazy sub-concepts that pop up when a new idea is born.
He's kind of like a cosmic janitor.
That's a great way to put it.
But instead of cleaning up messes, he's wrangling ideas.
Exactly. And his new assignment is this desolate moon called Hermes the Fourth, which is basically like a tiny version of all the chaos of the hypersphere.
It's like the author is using this moon to show us all the weird stuff that's going on under the surface of these big fancy ideas, the things people don't usually want to talk about.
Okay, so before we get lost on Hermes the Fourth and all its craziness, let's talk about Liger for a second. He's a fascinating character, kind of a lonely guy, super smart, more comfortable with equations than actual people.
Yeah, he really embodies that classic image of like the isolated genius. Brilliant, but not great with, you know, people. I think you might find him relatable given how much you're into individual perspectives and all that.
Definitely. And he's got this unique ability because of something called the phonetic entanglement equation. It basically lets him manipulate language to control these sub-concepts.
Whoa.
Like, he can use words to change reality.
That's a pretty cool concept.
It is, right?
Philosophers have been debating about the power of language for centuries, and this chapter really brings it to life.
So we've got this lonely guy who's also a genius and has the power to change reality with words heading to this chaotic, weird moon to wrangle out-of-control ideas.
Yes.
It's like the beginning of a crazy sci-fi movie, right?
It totally does. And as we dive into the specific subconcepts Luger encounters on Hermes the Fourth, I think you'll see how these crazy random elements actually connect to some pretty deep philosophical ideas.
All right, let's buckle up and get ready to land on Hermes the Fourth. Things are about to get a whole lot weirder and a whole lot more philosophical.
Buckle up is right. This is going to be a wild ride.
Okay, so Luger's about to land on Hermes the Fourth, and I gotta say, the way they describe this moon, it's fascinating.
It really is like something straight out of a Philip K. Dick book.
I know, right?
Picture a cyberpunk city, but like turned up to 11. There are people with, you know, cybernetic stuff everywhere, clothes that look like they defy gravity, and this overall feeling of like something's not quite right. It's like the city itself is one of those subconcepts, still trying to figure out what it is.
I can totally see that. And you can just feel Luger's not comfortable the second he lands. It's not his world, you know. He's an outsider, which just makes his job even harder.
I bet.
But he dives right in, and the first sub-concept he bumps into, well, it's a big one.
Yeah, a whole philosophical debate about, get this, the end of the world.
The end of the world. Seems pretty straightforward.
You'd think so, right? But in this hyperspace thing, it gets super complicated. The chapter says it's too centralized.
Too centralized. What does it even mean? Like, Too centralized for hyperspace?
Okay, so imagine you're trying to stuff the entire Earth into, like, a thimble. It just doesn't work. The idea of the end of the world, the way we think about it, it's too tied to our planet, our limited view of things.
Mm.
But in hyperspace, with all its dimensions and realities, the end of one world could be the start of a bunch of others.
Whoa, that's a lot.
Right. It makes you wonder if maybe our way of looking at things is, well, a little narrow.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So what's next? What other weird sub-concepts does Luger run into on this crazy moon?
Well, the next one, it's got to be the weirdest. It's this long section about, are you ready for this? Bottles, like drinking bottles.
Bottles. Where did that come from? Moon men, hyperspace, end of the world debates, now bottles.
I know, it's out of nowhere, but stick with me. The chapter gets really detailed about how many bottles people are drinking and how drunk everyone's getting.
Okay, but how does that fit into everything else?
Well, it's open to interpretation, but I think it could be like a metaphor, right? Like for how intoxicating knowledge can be.
Intoxicating.
Yeah, like maybe too much knowledge or the wrong kind. It can overwhelm you.
Like it goes to your head?
Exactly. You get drunk on it, lose yourself.
I never thought about it like that.
Makes you think, right?
It does. But man, every time I think I'm starting to get it, this chapter throws something else at me. What comes after the bottle thing?
Oh, it gets even weirder.
Weirder than bottles.
Oh, yeah. The next part is just this jumble of random stuff, like pieces of internet chats, a flyer for a party called Jonestown 2K17, and even a diary entry from someone named Phoebe Caulfield, who sounds a lot like Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye.
Wait, what? Is there any connection between all this stuff? What is the author trying to say?
I think it's about how chaotic and unpredictable hyperspace is. Remember, Luger is supposed to be like taming these subconcepts, but they're not like normal ideas. They're messy, all over the place, and you can't really pin them down. It's like reality, fiction, and what's going on in people's heads have all just like blended together.
So it's not just about what these subconcepts are, but more about the feeling they give you, like that feeling of being lost and confused.
Exactly. And that feeling, that's a big part of understanding this whole chapter. But before we go too far, remember, this was supposed to be written by Philip K. Dick, right? And I think you can see his fingerprints all over this.
Yeah, you're totally right. The paranoia, not knowing who to trust, reality changing all the time, that's classic Philip K. Dick.
Right. And that connection adds a whole other level to the chapter. Dick's work, it often explored like what consciousness is, how fragile reality is, and the idea that what we think is real might just be our minds messing with us.
Okay, yeah, I see it now.
And I think those themes are definitely at play here.
So we've got this crazy, disorienting world full of weird subconcepts, and it's all seen through a Philip K. Dick lens. That's a lot to digest. But how does it all tie back to the hypersphere and Princess Power P. Chan?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It seems like all this weird, random stuff is somehow connected to the princess and her creating the hypersphere. It's almost like the hypersphere is being built piece by bizarre piece out of these subconcepts, even the ones that make no sense.
So is the author saying that even the biggest, most important ideas are built on weirdness, chaos, even stuff that's just plain absurd?
That's one way to look at it, but I think it goes even deeper. The chapter seems to be asking, what are the things, the subconcepts, that shape how we understand the world? What are the hidden, maybe even absurd ideas that make our reality what it is?
Yeah.
And do we even know they're there?
Ooh, that's a heavy question. It's like the chapter showing us the weird stuff happening behind the curtain, the things we don't usually see.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, if our reality is built on something so strange and chaotic, what does that say about us? And what does it even mean to really understand something when reality is constantly shifting?
Wow. Okay, now we're getting into some deep philosophical stuff. But I think that's what makes this chapter so interesting.
I agree.
It's not just some sci-fi story. It's a story that makes you think about what knowledge is, perspective, even what reality is.
Absolutely. It challenges us to look beyond what's right in front of us, to accept the weirdness, and to question everything, even the stuff that seems obvious.
This has been quite the trip. We've gone deep into hyperspace, met some bizarre subconcepts, and even questioned reality itself. What are your final thoughts on this mind-bending chapter?
It's a brilliant example of how science fiction can explore big philosophical questions.
I agree.
It's a story that sticks with you. It makes you question what you believe and embrace how weird the universe is.
Well said. I think this chapter has given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners feel the same. What's the one thing you want them to take away from this deep dive?
Don't be afraid of what you don't know. Dive into complicated and challenging ideas. Question everything, even the stuff that seems obvious. And remember, the things that shape our reality might be weirder and more amazing than we ever imagined.
That's a great message to end on. Keep exploring those subconcepts, everyone. Man, we've been through the hypersphere, wrestled with all those crazy subconcepts, and even questioned if reality is even real.
Yeah, my head's spinning a little bit too, to be honest.
I bet. This chapter is a lot to take in. So much going on, so many layers.
Really
For our listeners who are probably feeling the same way, let's try to break it down.
good idea.
What are the big takeaways from this crazy trip through hyperspace?
Well, I think one of the most important things to remember is that even the most complicated ideas, the big important ones, they're built on simpler ideas.
Like building blocks.
Exactly. But the building blocks can be unexpected, sometimes weird, even totally bizarre.
Like you don't really understand something until you get what it's made of, even the messy parts, right?
Right. And this doesn't just apply to like the hypersphere, but how we understand everything.
Like in real life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What are the hidden things, the biases we don't even realize we have, the sub-concepts that shape how we see the world?
Wow, that makes you think.
It does, right?
So we got to be more aware of the stuff that's influencing our thoughts, even if we don't realize it's there.
I think that's a big part of what the author is trying to say.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Another big takeaway is that perspective matters.
Oh, yeah, like how everyone sees things differently.
Exactly. The same idea can mean totally different things to different people depending on who they are, what they've been through.
Like with Princess Powerpeach and her father, right? Same concept, totally different approaches.
Exactly. And even Luger, with his, word-bending powers, he's got his own unique way of seeing these sub-concepts. The chapter seems to be saying that there's not one right answer, one truth.
There are lots of perspectives.
Lots of perspectives, all competing with each other.
And that brings us back to Philip K. Dick, right? All that paranoia, unreliable narrators, questioning reality.
It all fits, right?
It does, yeah. It all suggests that reality is subjective, it's not fixed, it can change.
The chapter is definitely blurring the lines between what's real and what we think is real, suggesting that our minds might be creating a lot of it.
That's kind of freaky when you think about it.
It is, but it's also kind of cool.
How so?
Well, if reality isn't fixed, if it's all in our heads, then we can change it.
We have the power to shape our own reality.
Exactly. Create our own meaning. That's a big idea the author wants us to think about. But, with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Yeah, Spider-Man.
Exactly. If we're all making our own realities, then we got to be careful about the things, the sub-concepts, the assumptions that are shaping how we see things.
So it's not just about questioning everything and accepting the weirdness, but also about really looking at ourselves and how our own biases might be messing with how we understand the world.
You got it.
That's deep, man.
It is, but I think it's a really important lesson to take away from this chapter. We can't just sit back and absorb information.
We have to do something with it.
Exactly. We got to engage with it, question it, challenge it, and ultimately use it to build our own understanding of the universe.
That's a great point. So if you had to sum up the whole message of this chapter in one sentence, what would it be?
Be open to what you don't know, question everything, and pay attention to the hidden things that shape your reality.
It's pretty good. I like that.
Thanks.
Thanks for taking us on this wild ride through this chapter.
Glad to be here.
And to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, and maybe we'll see you on the next deep dive. Until then, happy reading, everyone.